to welcome to the lectern a representative of civil society, Ms. Hindou Ibrahim from Chad.
Indigenous people are our first line of defense against climate change, and today's guest is one of Indigenous people's most eloquent defenders. Here she is addressing the United Nations General Assembly for the formal signing of the Paris Climate Agreement in April 2016.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to speak in this assembly. This assembly who decide war and peace, who has now to decide the survival or the death of my community. My people, the Mbororo community, nomadic pastoral...
Hindou Ibrahim grew up in rural Chad, a member of the nomadic Mbororo people. Today she co-chairs the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on climate change, and she advises, some would say charms, others would say cajoles, everyone from major corporations like Asia Pulp and Paper to small indigenous communities from Ecuador to Indonesia to take action on climate change.
Are about to become climate refugee.
A quick note for those of you who've asked about the second installment of my two-part piece on the U.S. Clean Water Rule. That is forthcoming, but those documentary-style packages are a lot of work and they take a lot of time. Working on that has held up other shows like today's, but be patient, and if you really want to hear more and better episodes, you can support me for as little as $1 per month by becoming a patron at bionicplanet.com.
Man may be unwittingly changing the world's climate through the waste products of his civilization.
There's a group of us now who are proposing that the Earth has actually entered a new epoch, and that is the Anthropocene.
We know that the enemy is carbon, and we know its ugly face. We should put a big fat price on it, and of course, add to that, drop the subsidies.
Earth. We broke it, we own it. And nothing is as it was. Not the trees, not the seas, not the forests, farms, or fields. And not the global economy that depends on all of these. But we can restore it, make it better, greener, more resilient, more sustainable. But how? Technology? Geoengineering? Are we doomed to live on a bionic planet, or is nature itself the answer? That's the question we address in every episode of Bionic Planet, a podcast of the Anthropocene, the new epoch defined by man's impact on Earth. And nowhere is that impact more pronounced than in the world's indigenous territories, which are under threat from cattle ranchers, loggers, and palm oil companies, many of which will stop at nothing to make a buck by feeding our own ravenous appetites for beef, leather, and Nutella. I'm coming to you this week from the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, where more than 4,000 climate experts from around the world have gathered to focus on solutions to the climate challenge. And my guest is one of them. An unabashed critic of companies that run roughshod over indigenous territories, Hindou Ibrahim is also a vocal but skeptical proponent of sustainable development. Today's episode is made possible in part by the Environmental Defense Fund, which covered my travel for this event, and of course, Forest Trends, which publishes Ecosystem Marketplace and makes all of my work possible. I'm coming to you from the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, so apologies for the sound if it's not up to par. But I actually recorded my interview a few months back in Accra, Ghana, at the annual General Assembly of the Tropical Forest Alliance 2020, or TFA 2020, which you may remember from episode 22. TFA 2020 is comprised of about 100 entities, from governments like that of Ghana to companies like Unilever, committed to purging deforestation from key supply chains like those of palm oil, soy, and pulp and paper by the year 2020. These companies and governments haven't always been friendly or fair to indigenous people, and they still aren't. At least not always, which is why Hindou Ibrahim was invited to the TFA event. She first emerged as a vocal proponent of indigenous rights at the 2009 climate talks in Copenhagen, Denmark. Talks technically known as the 15th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP15 as it's colloquially known. Indigenous rights have since been enshrined in the Paris Climate Agreement, and Hindou has emerged as the face of that process. I was curious to find out what she expected to accomplish at the TFA meeting. As it turns out, quite a lot. She's now heading an indigenous working group within TFA 2020 that aims to forge cooperation between indigenous peoples and major corporations looking to secure finance by embracing the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which I covered in episode 5. One reason this interview sat on ice is that Hindou covers a lot of territory, and I wanted to edit this the way I usually do, by dropping interjections in after the fact to provide context. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to do that, although if I get more funding, I will edit this a bit more effectively down the road. Fortunately, she is an excellent speaker, and she explains herself incredibly well. For now, I just wanted to get a few terms in your head. The cops that she talks about aren't policemen, but those year-end climate talks that I mentioned a little while ago, while TFA is TFA 2020. She also alludes to regional meetings and general assemblies, and that's because TFA is broken into regional initiatives for Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. She references safeguards a few times too, and these are indigenous rights enshrined in global treaties like the Paris Agreement. And she talks a lot about the coming 1,000 days, because when we talked, we had roughly 1,000 days until the end of 2020, which is when hundreds of companies have promised to end deforestation. In another episode, we'll see that companies that make such pledges have in fact reduced their impact on forests, but less scrupulous companies, sometimes even divisions within more scrupulous companies, have simply stepped into the gap. So the net impact on deforestation is less than hoped. I started out by asking her to tell me a bit about her background, where she came from, and how she ended up here.
Yeah, so I'm coming from the Mbororo pastoralist community, and we are part of the Indigenous Peoples group. My people is around 5 countries: Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Central African Republic. So I'm in Chad, but I have a relative around all those 5 countries, because we are nomadic and living around this place. So personally, I grow up between the town and the community, because I get the chance to go to school. My mom and my dad come and settle in the town. And then when they sent us during the school time, and then we have the holiday, each holiday they send me back to the community. And that's why my connection with my peoples, where I speak the language, I did all the work that the other kids at the community does. And it's these marginalization issues that I face at the school who get me to fight for my own right.
Ah, interesting. This was in Chad. In the
yeah,
school in
this
Chad.
was in Chad.
So even though in Chad you were still marginalized because you were a
Absolutely.
nomadic person.
It's still to now. We have like a context that all the rest of the Chadian peoples calling us Falata or Aduban, and then that's meaning God create everybody, create even the insect before to create us. So
Oh,
it's
my
really
God.
a very marginalized
Wow.
term that they are using beyond again us. So when I went to the school, I felt myself very marginalized, but as kid you cannot understand why.
Right.
And then when I start growing up, then I'm always fighting for my own rights. And then I grow up, then I figure out that I'm really lucky to go to school, because I know the way how I can fight for myself, like being best to school, and then do not play a lot with the kids, but just showing them
I'm doing the right things every time. And I say, how about the other kids at the community who didn't get the chance to go to school, especially the young girl who get married and divorce very young age, between 10 and 12 years, and then after that they just do not have any other activities to do. I say the marginalization must be double than mine. So I started to create the Indigenous Women and People Association of Chad. And since I created this organization, in my mind I have one objective was to defend the rights of my peoples. Man, woman, doesn't matter. Children, doesn't matter. But defend them rights. And then immediately I realized, I cannot talk about the rights of peoples as human without talking about the right of environment where we depend for. And that took immediately the second objective, that's the environment protections. And then to relate that to the international mechanism and to see how we can get more protected, immediately we found that the 3 Rio Conventions, the climate change, biodiversity, and desertification are the right entry point to have other indigenous peoples and then define our rights together. So
Gotcha. Okay.
it's a little bit.
And how did you make inroads? Because you started this small organization in Chad. Now you're kind of a spokesperson for indigenous people, indigenous women especially, everywhere. How did you go from, this little school in Chad to starting this organization to then getting involved with these big mechanisms that you're talking about?
Actually, when I get started by this organization in my community, it's still like it's a community-based organization. It's not a big NGO or something like that. It's really a social movement. And then from that, they had some other organization who meeting in parallel, and then they come and said, we want to have someone who can be representing some peoples in Chad. And then they say, we know a lady who's fighting for this. And then they just connect me. And then when they connect me, I went. My first meeting was in 2000 in Yaoundé in Cameroon. So it was so difficult to my father to allow me to travel. Like I had the intervention of the former ambassador of Cameroon in Chad, who come home and assure my father that I take all the responsibility. She go and she come back. So when I went to this meeting, I meet a wonderful woman. One from Kenya called it Lucy Malenke, and then another one from Cameroon, Hawe Buba. So it was a women meeting on biodiversity. So after I make the presentation about my people, how we are fighting, and then immediately Lucy Mulenke get involved me on the biodiversity protections. And then I had my second meeting in Kenya. And then after that, I get connected with the broader indigenous peoples movement. And from this one, I met another woman who called it Sada El Bashir from Niger. And then she said, you are very young and you are very active, so we want you to have more knowledge. There is a fellowship program on indigenous people rights hosted by the High Commission of Human Rights. Why do not you can apply?
Right.
So she gave me the link, and then I applied, and immediately they accepted me. Then in 2007, I went to the Dijon University in France. I did human rights and indigenous people rights. It's like a very intense training at the university. And after that, I did a fellowship program on High Commission of Human Rights in Geneva on indigenous people's issues. And through this fellowship, we had 1 week in UNESCO in Paris to work with the knowledge departments, and also some days in ILO convention and in international labor organizations. And then immediately in international labor organization, they say, if you can come and work for us for at least 6 months, that will be good. And then I joined the team for 6 months, work at the ILO Convention 169. And this convention is about the tribal peoples. So I work in this one, and then at that time it was 2008. Then I figured out that you cannot work on defending the rights of indigenous peoples and environmental issues without speaking English. Because I was the only one who was French speaker and Arabic speaker in my team, and then we had the meeting every day. They come back like they speak in English, and then my direct supervisor, she turned to me, she said, "Hindou, did you understand something?" I get so mad. I said, "But I didn't understand anything." I said, "Okay, I have to put myself in the English." So that's also was.
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 20, something like that, and yeah.
But that's amazing, though. So you didn't speak English until 2008.
Any single word English I didn't, because we went to school in Chad just in French and Arabic. So then like just having the English class there, like you say A, B, C, D, you go out, forget about it.
Right.
Then at that time it was just like my first motivation in speaking English, because I want to defend the rights of my people. And after 2008, I figured they proposed to me to give me a contract if I can get like a long journey visa and things. Then I realized that it's not the things I want to do to work at the international organizations. I want to go and work with my peoples, go back home. And then I immediately went back. And I start to get reorganized at the community level. And then from the biodiversity that I attend the COPs, it was I attend also the climate change at that time. And then I realized that people are so ignorant about indigenous peoples in the climate change convention, and like they want to block. There was a big division. It was 2008 in the Poznan COP that they divide already between developed and developing countries. And at that time we were preparing the Copenhagen conference in 2009, who failed us. So as African indigenous peoples and as African civil society, we come back and then we settle together a network of French speakers NGOs, because we found that it's a big battle, and all the French speaker countries have a very big barrier to negotiate during the climate negotiation, and they are small in number. And then we say, as civil society, we have to support them. We have also to support our issues. So when we organize through the network, call it Réseau Climat et Développement, like network of climate and development. And then we went to Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, it was so bad experience for me. After Meles Zenawi came, he was the spokesperson of Africa. Then he came with a completely different position of Africa. He was the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia. So then it's so disappointing, all of us. And then I had a press conference where I was so mad, saying that my people are already in the corridor of death, and you are just sitting as robots, do not think about anyone, and then you put your mind in this international interests. And so that was also one of the door open to meet some big peoples. One of them, it's Nicolas Hulot, the actual Minister of Environment of France. At that time, he was a big documentalist person around environment and human around the world. So he did that for 25 years. He asked me on that time, Hindou, what we can do for your peoples. I say, if we can give them a visual of the impact of climate change in my people, that maybe can change their mind. And then I didn't know that he was a documentalist. I just like giving my views. And then 2010, I went to Japan, for the Nagoya Protocol under the CBD, the Biodiversity Conventions. And then they called me, say, oh, Hindou, we need you to stop over to Paris, and we discuss. When I stop it over, then they said they are going to turn a big documentary in my community. That was really a big declic. And we had the documentary, the last one on Ushuaia Nature, 1 hour and a half, around all Chad and talking on climate change impact. So after that, we start organizing as indigenous peoples at the international level. So 2008, we put like a global steering committee from the 7 regions of indigenous peoples. So then we get prepared every year. 2014, it was the COP19 of the climate change in Lima. And then I was in the room negotiating, and my colleague nominated me as the co-chair of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change.
Okay.
Because the COP was happening in Paris, and we don't have a direct relative indigenous peoples in Paris, but I am the French speakers, and then I am part of the indigenous people movement, and then like for my colleagues it's a value add. They just like nominate me. I came back to the room and they say, oh, congratulations, new co-chair. I say like, what? All these? They say yes. So then at that time I take my decision that I can never feel down my fellow indigenous people from the 7 regions. So I start organizing. We negotiate with Norway, with UNDP, who give us financial support. So we organize through the 7 regions of indigenous peoples. That's Africa, Asia, Latin American and Caribbean, Arctic, Pacific, North America, and Eastern Europe and Russia. So our 7 regions are defining through our socio-cultural appartenance.
Okay.
So it's not like the UN one. Then it's recognized officially under the UN that indigenous peoples have 7 regions.
Okay.
So through those 7 regions, we organize regional consultations, many national consultations. We come up with a position paper. In this position document, we highlight the rights of indigenous peoples under all the climate negotiations, the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples, the indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge as part of the solution to the climate adaptation and mitigations, and action on climate action and policies on indigenous peoples. So we agree on all those positions and we start pushing on it. So I help it to organize 2 informal consultations between state governments, about 42 of them, with indigenous peoples to have a preparatory meeting when we explain to them our positions. And after that, we went to the Paris. And in Paris, we negotiate very hard. And at the end, for the first time at the history of the climate negotiations, since 20 years, we get 5 references on indigenous peoples.
Right, wow.
So some of them are on the rights. That's in the preamble of the Paris Agreement in his decisions, in the participations, in taking into consideration of all the needs of indigenous peoples. And one of them that we are working on it now is the decision 135, who is on the indigenous peoples and the local community knowledge platform. So who have 3 components: knowledge sharing, capacity building, and policies and action on policies. So they so at that time, between 2014 and 15, a friend of mine introduced me to the TFA concept.
The what?
The
TFA.
TFA
Okay,
concept.
yes.
Then they say, there are companies who take the commitment to go to zero deforestation, reduce emission, shift from all what they're doing to the sustainable management and things. But as indigenous peoples, historically, we have some barrier with the private sectors. They are the one who grab our land. They are the one who really damage our rights and then put us in danger. So like in our concept, we never negotiate with the private sector. We never sit in the same table and talk with them. So the a friend who convinced me, he said, but Hindou, we know your concept and we know that you are the culture, you represent the voice of all the indigenous peoples around the world, but we want you to just to go and listen. I said, okay, listening can make nothing. So then I went to the first meeting in Geneva. Then I just sit down. There was another colleague of mine, it's his personal capacity also, Abdan. He's from Indonesia. So we just to hear from what they're saying, what they're doing, and then I figure out that there are some private sector who willing really to change. Mm-hmm. They're willing to respect the rights of indigenous peoples. They're willing to start from zero because they accept that they damage our right, but they want to correct that. And then they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So I figured out that, okay, of course we are, I cannot say enemy, but we really don't like each other. But even God can forgive someone. So we are a human. We're supposed to make a mistake. If someone wants to change, maybe we have to give him guidance. And if we are outside and criticizing, maybe it's not the best way that to tell them you are not right. Then I say, okay, let me see how I can be there and see if you can change or not. So then I engage in my personal capacity there. And I start to see how they are working. And then the first time they invited me to go visit in APP in April, the two bigger company of paper in Indonesia. Mm-hmm. So when I went there, I visited them for a couple of days. I saw how big they are, what they are doing around the world. And then they were so proud to take us around and then to take us around the community that they are supporting as cooperative. So I observed all the things, and after that we sat down at meeting with all the other colleagues around. Then I said, you are owning a lot of money, owning power, but you cannot own peoples. You have to respect the rights of peoples, and this is the things that matter in this world. You can be anyone, not having anything, but you can be no one if you don't have peoples behind you.
Right.
And if you do not respect the rights of peoples, you can get anything in this world, but you are nothing, because you are a human being. Soon or later you're supposed to die, as well as the other person that you are damaging them, right? So you have to be sustainable in another way. So I gave them my observations. I said they have to change. They have to respect the Mother Earth that feeding us. They have to change absolutely. So then we come back to another meeting that where we had. So then some of them present some strategy that they're willing to change and they want to do that.
What was it exactly when you went to this community that APP was working with that made you think they weren't doing enough?
So when I went to this community in Indonesia, in the place that we visited, they have indigenous communities, and then they have other community that they took from different islands. They put them in this Sumatra land.
They relocated.
They relocated. So while they relocated, they give them like 1 hectare to each to produce a palm oil.
Or 2 acres.
Or 1 or 2, 2 hectares.
These are
something like
plasma
that.
farmers.
Exactly.
Then. Right, okay.
So then the company organized those relocated peoples through a cooperatives. And then they start running the business in a very good way. But the indigenous peoples who are there have a different relation with the land.
Right.
And as all of us, our land is not for sale. We are not there to just to grow the cooperative with the private sector. Our land is our identity. It's who we are. Even you produce less, you are proud of it because it's you. You produce a lot, you are proud of it. You need to make the sale as you, as yourself, not being through many others to do that. So this concept is not understood by the companies, and then they said, oh, you don't want to be with us, we just leave you there. And they start supporting the other who are relocated. So from my observation, they create a division, and then they create like a imbalance between the two communities.
Right.
So actually now the business going well, they can still protect the peoples that they create the cooperative for. But one day, it's a natural resources is not going to be the same. Or one day, the Indonesian government will change, or the mine will change, or some of the indigenous people become also governors, or I don't know, responsible of the regions. So the risk will be a big conflict between the two communities. Even both of them are Indonesian, but there will be an enemy. They will have a conflict between themselves, and then the impact will be not on the elders now. It will be in the new generation who will come up.
Right.
I'm coming from a war conflict country. I know how it's very hard and complicated situation, the conflict between two communities. It's not the issue of two peoples or just one generation. It's the issue of all the generation coming up. When you are growing up, they tell you that don't go to this person, don't play with these kids because they are our enemy. And then you grow up in your mind that you are enemy. So for me, they are really not acting well. They have to go beyond all the differences, beyond all the economy that they are thinking about it, but set up the future in a right way that they can give equity to the indigenous community, respect what they have, what they put as criteria, accept them as they are, and then work with the others in the equitable way. Otherwise, it's really a big risk that I'm seeing. And in another hand, I saw that they have a small protected forest that they replant the trees in the peatland, but still they have a big land where they put a palm oil there, who is really not sustainable. Like just is blushing the eyes. And then in another place they are exploring petrol. So you cannot do a fossil fuel here and do unsustainable palm oil there, and then say because you have 10 or 50 hectares of the forest that you are protecting, it's just like mitigating what you do. That cannot work. So through these examples, I think they have to change the mind, and that's what I observed through the TFA. And I get the support from the steering committee that's composed by the government, private sector, civil society, and us. So they say you are right in this way, and we need to protect more those peoples. And another thing that I did with the TFA, it's also through
just to clarify, so you basically you went to APP, you saw this, you realized, hey, these guys, you almost saw the creation of what you grew up with. You saw them creating this bifurcation, and you're like, oh, I know where this goes.
Yes.
And then TFA gave you a voice through which you could get this to companies and
Yes,
Okay.
I saw that in APP in April, both of them.
Both of
and
them,
then it's reminding me completely, like I know where it's going to go. So
Right.
then like it's my duty to tell them that you have to stop that. It cannot work.
Yeah.
So then I get the support from all the TFA. Then I get the support from the Secretariat also, because I said I want to make the video. Then they help me making video describing all what is happening
TFA
there.
did?
Yes,
Okay.
TFA Secretariat did. So then after that, like I feel that there is more need of our voice to tell them what is right and what is wrong according to our understanding in order to get change. So after that, we had the discussion around how we can raise the gender issues and also the inclusiveness. So I have been the co-chair with Lexine from USAID of this working group. So with the help of Meridian, we set up the gender strategy, and I input always, and they never criticize my input or they never refuse it. All my input are considered, and I share it, and then we make a presentation for all the steering committee, and we make the last presentation to adoption at the last General Assembly in Brazil. So
That was, when was that? What month?
last year.
Last year, September, right? Or okay.
So no, not is it September? Before September, July.
Okay,
like that,
okay.
So then we did these presentations, gender and inclusiveness. So inclusiveness for us is how they can include the voice of indigenous peoples and how they can include the voice of local communities, like small holders there, and that can be part of how we can include all the marginalized group through the TFA. And then the objective of this strategy for us, it's not to impose to the partners, but is to give them as guidance to say, you want your business go well, you have to go through this strategy and adopt it to your realities and apply it. So then we create like a forum, a virtual forum where people can discuss, ask questions, like they can say, oh, I want to really include gender in my work, or indigenous
Like if a company,
peoples.
you mean if a company wants
Yes,
to?
company or government or I mean all the partners of the TFA. So in this virtual, like they can ask questions, and then people can share experience. They say, oh, I use this to include it, I use that to include it. So it's have been like a tools where people can use them and adopt them. And during the General Assembly, I mean, what also I like in this TFA, we went to the field trip. In the field trip, I went there in Paraguay. It was completely another reality, because you see the deforestation is a huge issue there, because at the earlier age the government pay peoples who cut the forests, because for them it's most important to make the economy. So I found that like, wow, this is really another approach of linking development and then another concept. And now they figure out that they really need the forest to come back. So we visit an indigenous community there that marked me forever when they told them that with my colleagues, oh, she is an indigenous. Like I have all the kids running around me. All the elder peoples, they do not speak any English, I do not speak any Spanish, but we feel very close. And then this TFA create this relationship, and then we discuss about how they live, how them life is, and then we have like still the same concept of our relationship with environment. So that make me feel so great to discover this experience in another place. And when we come back, like I say, okay, we need to decentralize the work of the TFA. Of course, we supposed to do at the international level, but how this work can be supported through the partners at the national level and then also at the regional level. So we discuss on those issues, and then continuously with the secretariat, with the steering committee to see like how we can improve it. And then immediately the General Assembly have to come to Africa. And then through this, I committed to have more voice of indigenous peoples there. And we work hard with Patricia to figure out how we can get more indigenous peoples. So we get here two wonderful women from Brazil and from Colombia, and then two wonderful guys also from DRC and from Burundi to be here in TFA. We tried to get from Asia, but it was with the conflict of agenda of some of them, and others because of the relationship between Indonesian indigenous peoples and the company who are working there. So it's limit them commitment or them engagement with the TFA. So this is the negative situation we are having actually now that we need to fix. We have to start from a different way, because they are right. I mean, I'm defending the indigenous peoples then. Indigenous people of Indonesia are right if they don't want to be in the TFA because they saw something wrong in them rights.
Right, yeah.
So we miss indigenous people from Asia to be in this General Assembly. However, we also discussed to have a special session on indigenous peoples, presenting our way of understanding of zero deforestation. And this session went well yesterday, attended by many peoples who asked several questions like how TFA can help us more. And then after that we had a closed door meeting between indigenous peoples to see what will be our commitment. So we come up with some propositions. We don't know if this can work or not. So one of them is we need exchange between indigenous peoples across the 3 continents. Indigenous people from Africa can visit the indigenous peoples in Latin America or in Asia or vice versa, in order to learn from how the others did to claim them land or to better protect them knowledge. So that can help us to achieve also the zero deforestation in another way. And the second proposition was about how the TFA can support a dialogue at the regional level between indigenous peoples, state governments, and companies to sit down and then discuss the real issues, where are the gaps, and then we can figure out how we can handle each problem to find a solutions. And another proposition, the third one, was like how at the regional level, the regional coordinators can engage more indigenous peoples in the regional work and the regional steering committee in order to get the voice and the needs of indigenous peoples. And then the fourth and final one, it's during the General Assembly or during the big event of the TFA, how we can have the space for indigenous peoples. Because we saw that during all the events all the day, we have company who stand up, make them strategy, present them program in all the dialogue that we are having. So we say, why not giving any space for indigenous peoples? Also, we can present our views, we can present our strategy, our approach, our innovations, and then we feel that inclusive in this kind of discussion. And then we can also explain to the other company and also government who do not know our concept, because many of them do not know that. So we end up with those kind of the propositions, and then we we will put them maybe in written and propose that to the steering committee, and we will see who among the partners willing to support those kind of ideas. But it's really a way forward, according to myself, to see how we can change the approach. Anyway, we are all want to have the zero deforestation, and zero deforestation is not meaning just okay, we end up cutting the forest and then we have the forest, and it's a process. It's one. So we want to the final objective to be the decreasing of carbon. We want to have 1.5 degree. So it's not only around the forest, but it's around all our consumption and production around the world. So if we want to reach this global goal, we have to be partners in one or another way. We have to collaborate, absolutely. And when we need to collaborate, we have to restart from fresh. We have to put the trust among all the partners, and we have to put a transparency in order to share all our good things, yes, but also our bad things that we need to correct all together and accept with all our differentiations. And then we need the truth to be told. Most of the indigenous peoples, they refuse to collaborate with the private sector because we think that they are lying to us. We think also
with good reason. There's been a lot of bad history.
And most government are lying to us. So we have to end up with lying and start from the truth. So from the government also, we want to have transparency, because it's very easy to commit at the international level to give the nice pictures, like, yes, we give you this money, we are going to support this, to support that. But the reality is on the ground. The reality is at the local level. So how they can show us that the commitment they are doing at the international level are well implemented at the local level and in the same coherence and respected. So that's really what we are asking as indigenous peoples.
Okay, that's a lot. That's really interesting. What is really interesting? You talk about the connection to the land, and it's fascinating how indigenous people, no matter where they're from, have this connection. I know I've done a lot of work with people in Brazil, and the connection to the forest is so strong. It's like it's the world. And it's interesting to hear that you have the same feeling in Chad. And you talk to the Maasai guys, they have the same feeling. And it's also been shown, there's study after study have shown that indigenous people reduce deforestation. If you look at a map of Brazil, where there are indigenous territories, there's still forest. And sometimes it's like a clear line. The indigenous territory ends, and then it's all farms. And they've made a huge commitment to not accept money to chop trees, although sometimes they have to survive. When you talk about the proposals that you want to put forward, what would they be? Are you talking about sustainable forest management? Or are you talking about working within a RED context, or is it something completely different? What kind of proposals do you see yourselves making to companies to sort of see that you can coexist in this world?
So firstly, company need to adopt the approach of respecting the existing safeguard. So how they can change all them views by FPIC, the free, prior and informed consent. If they want to do something or they are doing it, how they can get the consent of the community and how they can respect this consent. Consent is saying yes, sure, but it's saying also no. If they say no, they have to stop that, because they cannot say no for nothing. They say no by reason.
Right.
And secondly, it's how they can respect and protect the community forests, the community land. How they can also help the land titling or the land tenure.
Yes,
to
big
be
issue. Yeah.
To be the realities. And that need the effort from the government, but also from the company, because they are the one who grabbing the land.
Yeah.
And land is the life for us, and land is the forest. Land is everything that people have. So how the land tenure can be aligned on the community needs together. And then because we do have the collective rights, and then because of the some of the constitutions in many countries, like you cannot have land titling, like collective land titling, it's not usual. But the customary laws exist already.
Right.
How they can value and respect the customary laws there. So that will be the first step of collaboration among all the three parties. And in order to do so, we need to put that on the process. That's why we ask to have the exchange between indigenous peoples to see how we can harmonize our views. Secondly, how we can have a regional setup and discussions that can be based on the jurisdictional way, and then people can see what is exist, where are the gap, how they can help to fill this gap jurisdictionally, and then implementational way, how they can help each other to implement it, because the implementation needs also a process. It's not only what they say at the capitals, but what it will be happen at the ground level. So when we set up together, I think we can reach it. And as we said, 2020 is about 1,000 days. So 1,000 days, maybe it's long for some people, but it's nothing for us. It's really about tomorrow. So if we start that, we put our objective in a clear roadmap. We have the three regions. We have some of the partners who are members, and we can found the indigenous peoples. So at least by 2020, we didn't reach the objective that we set up. Anyway, we can never reach it by 2020.
Right.
But at least we have the clear roadmap set down, and then we can give ourselves some years again to see how we can reach this commitment. So that can be different engagement than the first one we had during we were so excited about Paris, and then just to put numbers with no real reason.
And do you feel, how do you make sure, you kind of answered this already, but you need to make sure that this goes beyond the blah blah phase, that it's not just words, that it's actually action on the ground. How do you at what point do you expect, because you have to be patient, and to a certain extent you have to say, okay, they can't do it today, something has to be implemented, but what are the steps that you'll need to see to know that this is being taken seriously? What will companies have to do, early indicators and later indicators?
I think that's why we need the transparency. So the transparency involves also accountability. So they are accountable on their own wording. When they say they committed to someone, they have to show this commitment is not just a blah blah, but is the reality. So in order to see it, they have to publish all what they committed, where they are actually now, where they want to go, how they will go there, which step that they are taking to be there. And that can ensure us to see, yes, they can do that, they are able, or they are not able. We have a lot of experience of good papers or good talks who never happen into the actions. So I think we cannot lie to ourselves. We already know all those things, and we don't want them happen, because now is not time of making nice things. It's really time of changing for reals. And to change for reals, they have to show us how it's happening, how it's going to be. It's not about publishing the report that they have, because we know that they can have the report, anyone can make the report as they want, not this way. We want them to show us the evidence. Not counting like they have 1,000 hectares, okay, so we stop 100 hectares. Yes, it's easy to say, or it's easy to put in the paper, but in the practical way, how? because we are living there. Did they make a visual to show us? Or there are people who went there and visit? Because my visit to APP in April showed me the evidence of things. I live those things even during the 2 days. If I go back today and then I see it's still the same, I know that they didn't change.
Right.
If I went there, then I saw the relationship between the two communities start to change. I know that they make the advance. But they can put in the paper, they say, okay, we set up this strategy, we are going to do this, we are going to do that, but it's not said, it's not meaning that they did it or they are going to do it exactly. So this kind of things that we really need. Always, of course, I agree with the bigger society needs, like we need rules, we need everything to be written, to respect. But one thing, all what we are writing down, it's written by us. So what is show that we are going to respect it or change it or do not change it? So we are the master of it, so we can change it as we want. So this is really not the reality. What we want is the real issues what's happening on the ground. I think that's why I understand for many times that in my people we are a oral peoples. We do not write the things. We believe people on the wording that they say. And then people respect you through your wording. If you say something then you didn't implement, no one consider you as like a responsible in your community. And then people do not play with them dignity. And dignity for us, part of dignity is your wording. So we really respect that a lot. But imagine if your wording is written and is not respecting, this is like really
it's a double.
It's a double, exactly. So to avoid all those misunderstandings, we wanted to see the concrete action happening, and that can help us to monitor what we did. So if we have the clear roadmap, we say, okay, TFA is facilitating platform, and TFA can help to put this monitoring on evidence, and then to show that yes, there are some advance in here, and if they are advanced, it can be very evident because it can change the life of peoples, the livelihood of people. It can change the air because there are a lot of air pollution. It can change the air, it can change the sickness, it can impact the food security. So you can see immediate impact through the life cycle of peoples. But if there is no change, even they put nice things in the paper, you can see it. So that's the thing we need to avoid and have the same understanding of all the indicators that we can see together.
So basically, now we've got these companies making these commitments. They need to come up with indicators that are verifiable, and then it becomes up to you. If they don't keep them, we tell the world, basically. You're right. So that becomes the recourse. Do you feel pretty optimistic right now, or you don't want to? Is it too early to say?
I'm always saying that being optimistic, this is the only one thing who keep us alive. Because otherwise we cannot be in this life if we go back and tell our community that, oh, sorry guys, we are not going to reach anything. We don't have any plan B, nothing work. So it's going to be so depressive, and then we give up everything, and then we just close. So being optimistic for me, it's already starting, but having this kind of dialogue, having some ideas and listening from others, putting some way forward, some innovative ideas, but some radical ideas. This is the optimistic way. We cannot say always things are in color. We have to say that they are black or they are white. So if we have those radical ideas and then we wanted to change, that give the optimism much life, and that can help us also to see maybe we can get one day in where we want to go.
Indigenous leader Hindou Ibrahim closing out this episode of Bionic Planet. If you like what you hear, be sure to share the love by giving me a good rating on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you access the show. That will help others find me as well. You can also support me financially for as little as $1 per month by becoming a patron at bionic-planet.com. Once again, that's bionic-planet.com. If enough of you do that, I can deliver more episodes and maybe better produced episodes to boot with a second set of ears and better editing and pacing. And finally, if you listen to audiobooks, you can support me by visiting audibletrial.com/Bionic Planet. That's Audible Trial, all one word, audibletrial.com/Bionic Planet for a free 30-day trial at audible.com. The address again is audibletrial.com/Bionic Planet. And that's Bionic Planet with no dots, dashes, or spaces, as opposed to my website, which is bionic-planet.com. That's all for today. Until next time, I'm Steve Zwick in San Francisco. Thanks for listening.